know, this is our 30th year as an agency. We started in Huddersfield, and it's impossible to start a business in Huddersfield 30 years ago, I would claim, unless you've got a very close proximity with textiles. Not only was it a textile town, but Huddersfield was regarded on a global stage as being the mecca of textiles. So, you know, after we'd kind of opened the doors, and that was a story in itself, I have to tell you, because my obsession for the first few weeks of the agency, yes, of course, winning clients is important, but I was far more preoccupied with at getting the flashiest looking office that I could afford, and then not afford as well at the same time. We pushed the office, and then I realised probably 6 weeks in it might be quite good to get a client, and went out hitting the streets of Huddersfield, and it looked quite bleak, if I'm being honest. I think at the end of month 3, when the third set of wages were due, at 2 staff, I got a little bit of a break. I think everybody needs a break in this game. My break came in the form of Camborne Fabrics in Mirfield, and they gave me a commission of £17,000. And £17,000 to me in those days, the only context I had for that was that the job I left had paid me, I think, £6,500. So in very simplistic terms, and forgetting the staff and the overhead bills, I was kind of all of a sudden nearly getting paid in a job I could turn around in 2 months, the equivalent of what I'd have had to work nearly 3 years on salary to achieve. So that was the kind of highly entrepreneurial start. And yes, it was a textile account in Camborne that was Propaganda's first official piece of business. Fast forward 12 months, this is where it gets really interesting. We'd 17 pieces of business. I used to have a little job board in the office. Those were a time when you could still know at every level, every piece of work you were doing. And with 17 clients, without any exaggeration, all of those clients were either directly in textiles, so they would be manufacturing carpet yarn, or they would be processing the fibre that went into the carpet yarn. They'd be dyeing the stuff, they'd be making suit fabrics, technical fabrics, soft furnishings. Everything was furnishings, textiles related. If it wasn't directly textiles related, it was downstream from textiles, so the guys making the machinery, for example, that went into it. So 17 clients, all of which were in textiles. And then one day I'd ventured out to Leeds, and I was with a business whose job it was to make what they called dye cake. Dye cake was dye stuff, and it went in the machines to dye the fabric again. It went in this baked cake form. And he showed me this graph. It was the reason he'd called in an agency. And the graph on the wall showed consistent growth forever, you know, way back into the realms of time where these businesses came out of, and then it just drops like a cliff. And that was within the past 6 months. He called that drop the effect of the Tiger Nations, and this is something that was an incredibly formative part of our upbringing, our learning, where the skill was honed. The Tiger Nations came into the UK market. Tiger Nations effectively being Hong Kong, Taiwan, South Korea, Singapore. They came in with brand new machinery. They came in with price competitiveness of a like we couldn't cope with. And the effect it had was they could basically make identical product at a fraction of the price. And that cost textiles dearly in not just Huddersfield, but in the UK. The effect it had on us a year into business, it saw those 17 textile clients, and it sounds very draconian, it just happens to be the truth. Within the next 18 months, only 3 of those businesses were in operation. You know, so, excuse my maths, but effectively 14 failed, went bust, whichever term you want to put on it, directly because of the effect of the textile nations. So my business, Propaganda, this little ambitious agency in Huddersfield, suddenly saw its customer base decimated. And through that 12, 18 months of decimation, we learned an awful lot. And I just want to give some examples of what life was like in Huddersfield with these businesses when the emergence of the Tiger Nations happened. One example, really profound. I can't name the client. It wouldn't be ethical of me to do that, simply because some of the workers are still in and around and in other businesses. But they were in the business of fine suiting. I think they had a direct link to Savile Row. And again, they'd suddenly seen their business decimated. At the outset, I met them at the very early days of the emergence of the Tiger Nations, and their arrogance was astounding. I remember one conversation where they said, yeah, listen, it's not going to bother us because our product is made on looms that are so old, and those looms that are so old, they're on floors that are so rickety, and they're managed by fifth generation weavers that can almost make those machines sing. There's absolutely no way anybody getting into this game at the other side of the world can possibly take that craft or threaten that craft that we have here. The reality was, those in the Tiger Nations had brand new state-of-the-art equipment, ISDN linked. It needed no more teaching than half a day's worth of lesson to press a button on and off, and the computers did the rest. The arrogance was profound, and that was one chapter of that particular client. The far more worrying chapter is when it did hit them and they were beginning to be open to listen to ideas. The one idea that we gave them, I say to this day, could have saved that business. I'll stand by that. And we were digging into their operation, and we found out that a high percentage of their orders came from film, TV and theatre companies from all around the world. Not only were these orders quite significant, but these clients were figuring out for themselves in conversation with this company that this company held the patterns of what people were wearing every decade for the past 500 years. So anybody doing period dramas on the stage could literally borrow the designs as well as then buy the fabric. And when they bought the fabric, they never quibbled over price. It was full price purchase. So we said, wow, listen, this is incredible. Why don't we promote this business, a singular service? We'll promote it to every opera company, every theatre company, every TV company around the world. We will make your IP and your asset this pattern book, and effectively you'll have someone no one else has. You'll have a need that's proven. And some of the fag packet conversations saw that business at full margin, potentially doubling the turnover that they had. When I presented this idea, to my mind, there was no doubt they were going to buy it. And if you could have filmed that session and listened in that meeting to the reaction of the people around that table, you'd have put your house and you'd have put your family on there, and you'd have wagered they were going to buy the idea. And then when I'd finished and I sat down and I felt pretty smug because I thought, here I am, we've just saved your business, you know, work feels good. They thanked me for a spectacular piece of work. And then at the end, the chairman turned round and it was a kind of laugh. And he just said, we won't, I paraphrase, we won't be doing it, lad. And I looked at him with absolute kind of shock. And I went, what do you mean? He goes, well, that's not what we do. And I couldn't understand it. But I think looking back now, several things were taking place here. One is that these people had never had to particularly fight to fill their machines. So fighting to fill them, selling if you want, was never more sophisticated than turning up a conversation, turning up an exhibition, shaking some hands, pressing some flesh, buying some drinks, and that was as sophisticated as it got. So when they needed to fight back, they couldn't fight back. They didn't know how to fight back. Marketing per se had never extended in their minds beyond a brochure or a struck card. That's the language they use. So giving them an idea like this, I think they got it, but they just couldn't stomach or understand how they might do that within their day job. And then there was another factor which, although not directly related to what I do for a living, became very evident to me throughout all of my experience with textiles. Most of these businesses by that time were being run by the son of the owner or the grandson of the founder. And you know what, these guys had been sent off skiing at 16 and called back into the family business at 18, 21. They didn't want to be there. They wanted to be back out on the slopes and enjoyed the money. So when going got tough for them as well, they just couldn't hack it. So we saw a naivety of ability to embrace marketing ideas. And that was one example. There were others. A really important one for us, which I talk about to this day, was where we went to a technical fabric business whose job it was to produce things a bit like a Gore-Tex fabric, but their niche was in providing for hot air balloons. I mean, some of these niches are incredible. And they invested at the time, I think it was £14 million in a machine that could produce this fabric at a double width. £14 million. Now, double width wasn't just kind of economics of scale. It meant there were less stitching on the balloon, so there was a real safety benefit to getting the fabric as wide as you could. Bear in mind, 14 million. And he said, look, no one knows this machine's here. We've now got to tell the world, we've got to fill it, we're ready, we've got staff trained, we've got shift patterns set up, we're going to slam it, we're going to be so busy. I said, great, how much have I got then for telling the world that this machine's here and telling them the benefits of a double width fabric? And he looked at me and he said, £15,000. And I thought it was a joke. And it wasn't a joke. This same, I want to say cretin, but I'm not sure it's polite, but I've said it anyway. This same guy that has managed to attract, you know, millions of capex for machinery, honestly thought it was sensible to attach £15,000 to the marketing budget to fill it. And again, this was another dynamic of every textile business. Creating a marketing budget was hell on earth. It was new monies, it was resented monies. But when you talk about buying a machine, boy, they'll buy machines all day because they can see it and they can touch it. And that, again, was the mentality, I think, of these businesses at the time. And all of this was happening systematically across all of those clients that I've talked about. And the aftermath, as I said, was that of the 17 we started with, 3 of them actually emerged out of that, and 14 disappeared. The effect on the UK economy and PLC was one thing. I was always more bothered, if I'm being honest, about the effect it had on those textile villages, on those streets and those towns and those town centres, and that guy or that woman who was coming up to that retirement that they'd slavishly worked towards. These people were decimated. The towns were decimated. And I don't mind saying they were decimated by the arrogance and the complacence and the stubbornness, and they were decimated by the failure of those businesses to understand the power of brand, and they had it at their disposal. Huddersfield had global equity, but it was never going to fight that at a machine level or a meterage level. It could have fought that in the hearts and minds territory, and these people could not invest in hearts and minds. So yes, I was, and I am angry at them, genuinely angry at them, because I think that these people were spectacularly arrogant and spectacularly ignorant. And I think that what that taught us as a business is that we had to look at ourselves, because these people weren't up for moving. They were not up for shifting their perception. And you know what? The guys at the top were loaded anyway. They didn't give a damn whether the mill shook. It was only the poor workers that suffered. I blame myself as a young guy, 18 months into business. I actually said, perhaps if I was better, perhaps if I had more gravitas. Perhaps if I had the ability to have somehow fought back to the guy saying, I've got 15,000, and somehow convince him to spend $1 million. Perhaps if I could have fought back against the company who rejected what I still think is one of the best ideas we've ever had, which was putting the IP around the collections and the patterns and selling the business on that, where the actual cloth was almost the afterthought. If I could have convinced that board of directors to fund that, I think they would still have been here today. I think they'd have been growing. I think they'd have been vibrant. I think they'd have led themselves into the web and digital arena, because that wasn't even on the table back then. So I think, you know, they could have been dressing the shows in Australia in real time online from all kinds of digital magic, but they never got there because of that arrogance, or because of my or our failure to convince them to do it. So, as I said, all I took out of that at the time was more internal reflection. And I thought, I can't change these people, but I can change us. And I think that this is what led propaganda to take an extremely different path to everybody else, with so much pressure placed on our ability to give confidence and courage to people who daren't take that decision or daren't make that investment. I think that what I became obsessive over was building a business which could give them that belief and conviction, and could embrace us at the very heart of that decision making. So not see us as the designers that turn in with the fancy portfolio, but see us as people who understood the balance sheet, the financial conversations, the investment, that could do modelling for them. And I think that's what made me really take this business very much down a marketing first route. And that's 30 years on what has absolutely underpinned our success. So when I look back at that terrible time of a word that I've used a lot here, that decimation, it became our DNA, and to this day at the very heart of propaganda is the word courage, and our external manifestation we talk about in the context of victory, because I believe it is a fight. And I believe that if it isn't a fight, then you're not pushing hard enough, like they didn't push hard enough. So we're often accused of going into perfectly calm situations and causing a bit of a fight. And I don't apologise for that, because I think that still in the north of England, and look, we're in Leeds today, I still live in Huddersfield, if it ain't a fight, you're not doing it right. And because nobody here has got the budgets to buy results, we've got to outthink when we can't outspend. And in that territory of outthinking, where you are pushing ideas to extreme levels, you are fighting, whether that's externally or internally, to get the client to support an idea that is incredibly bold. So I look back at textiles and I think that it is formative. We have textile clients today. By no means is it 100%, it's probably 10% of our world is in textiles, and there is a resurgence within there where people are embracing brand thinking first. But ultimately I will say that the manufacture base is sadly gone and lost, and one of the things that I've commissioned to celebrate our 30 years is a celebratory, if not slightly macabre, look back at the aftermath that was left by those business leaders who failed to keep those mills running, who failed to keep that staff in employment, and certainly who left Huddersfield with a scarring across its landscapes and across its towns and its architecture. And we worked with a photographer from Huddersfield called Richard Littlewood, and we've commissioned a series of photographs that were effectively briefed to capture the dark beauty of the aftermath of the textile decline. As I said, it's not particularly meant to be macabre, it's more of a look back at where we came from, and we do see a dark beauty in it. We see a northern grit in it, which we will always have and we will always be proud of. But it is a reminder of where propaganda was forged and where the heart of this business was forged.